land use element standpoint, 22,000 housing units sounds like a very big number, and there's no doubt about it, that's a big number. But when we break it down, it's 3 units an acre. I mean, most of Wake County was built out at 3 units an acre. Most of Mecklenburg County was built out at 3 units an acre. Not downtown Charlotte, the county. The predominant zoning that's been out there, it's built most of our suburban areas. There is a hat that I would wear that would say, actually, I'm a little concerned that that density is so low. But I think that some of the other things that I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes, and the fact that it's not going to be spread across evenly at 3 units per acre throughout the entire development, that there clearly would have to be clusters of development that makes it more walkable and more cohesive. I think you have opportunities. And what does that look like? Well, you all can drive just a little bit to the northeast and see Southern Village. It's got almost 20 years worth of growth under its belt, and you can see what 3 units an acre looks like in a very walkable way. So certainly a good precedent to take a look at. Meadowmont, another more recent example, also about 3 units an acre, but it doesn't really feel like 3 units an acre like we see in suburban Wake County, for example, or suburban Durham. Much different configuration. So again, I think imagery and precedents and sort of establishing these types of centers, in my mind, I can see what that means. I think it's not unduly reached. Question is, I think the bigger number is 22 million square feet of non-residential development. By coincidence, perhaps, RTP is about 22 million square feet of non-residential development today. They're looking to intensify a little bit of that. They're going to remove some of it and add some of it. But that's what that looks like in a very suburban format, low-slung buildings across the landscape, across 7,000 acres. South Park, in the Charlotte area, is about 5 million square feet. It's one of the largest submarkets in the state. Downtown Durham, 3.2 million. The Cary submarket, which is everything outside of RTP, is about 5.7 million square feet, spread across a fairly large area. Big numbers. I think one of the things that over time we recognize that this is a long-term build-out. RTP is a 35, 40-year build-out. There's been some references to Reston. Reston has been a 40-year build-out. They just built their town center in the last decade in large respects. So there are a lot of things that are going to happen over a long period of time. Anyone that's concerned that 4 million square feet is just going to show up on the front door, well, that would be counter to pretty much every market force that's out there today. Charlotte absorbed about 600,000 square feet of office development in the last year and a half. So even in good times, there's a long process for build-out of this. But it can look many different ways. It can look like this, where the multi-story mixed-use buildings are integrated with natural elements. It can look like some of these pictures, again, 3 or 4-story buildings, mixed-use buildings. Or it can look like this. And there's nothing in the current ordinance that, as it's set up today, and the master plan as it's set up today, that differentiates between those two as a development vision, development model. I think that's really important because these elements clearly have much different impacts over time. I think there's better opportunities. Again, from what I've seen, the development team really is looking to do better over time. It's just how do we get that prescribed into the master plan so that things can be moved forward. And there are a couple other elements in the land use section we'd recommend. I think standards of imagery are really important. The table of uses that you all have today, I got to be honest, it's as bad as I've seen, but I've seen a lot of bad ones. And it's just something you all have had for a really long time. It's time for an update of that anyway. So the fact that you're forcing them to use that same table must be penitential for them. So, I think we need to take a look at how all that stuff gets pulled together and really recommending to the development team to look at a regulating plan that helps provide a little bit more certainty about where things are going in a smaller scale. Again, difficult to do at the scale of maps that you're looking at and using today, but as they get into more deeper and more complex elements of their projects, they can look at how all those things get put together. Because again, essentially what we're looking at is the PDD ordinance is a replacement zoning ordinance. Exempt a number of things out and establish their own sets of standards. With regard to utilities, I think a lot of the utility elements are going to be left up to the development agreement when capacity is made available and who pays for that capacity. One thing I'll recommend is I wouldn't create new standards for this development. I'd recommend a good set of high standards, which you have recently adopted, be applied across the entire jurisdiction. Will make development a whole lot easier so that one stream buffering detail or bioretention areas, when you cross over one property boundary, doesn't become something different. I don't expect that anything would be the case like that, but we need to make sure that's all nailed down. With regard to other public services, I think there are two critical ones. In most communities like yours, it's fire and it's schools. Those are the two things that are most directly impacted by new development and housing development. And I think this PDD master plan needs to recognize those elements and integrate sort of how those get played into the overall development process. It's one of those that's sort of almost there but not quite. And really establishing some basic thresholds for acreage and general location and accessibility. Again, I don't expect that the schools that would be provided as a part of this would be on really crummy land on the back end of a really crummy road for someone else to fix. But we do want to make sure that that all gets laid out because things can change over time. And then the construction details, who builds it and when, get nailed down in the development agreement. So not something we have to deal with today.